The first time I saw my own name struck through in blue ink, I told myself it was a mistake. The second time in black ink, on a different list, from a different year, I told myself it was still a mistake. But when I found the third list, the one from my cousin's engagement dinner, and saw my name written, crossed out, and rewritten in red pen, squeezed into a corner like an afterthought, I sat down on the cold attic floor of my mother's house with a box of 30-year-old party invitations in my lap, and I felt something inside me that had been sleeping for decades finally open its eyes. I was 41 years old, searching through my mother's storage boxes for tablecloths to borrow for my daughter's graduation party, and instead I found the architecture of my own erasure. Welcome back to Silent Ties Tales. Today's story is one of the deepest, most emotional journeys we have ever told on this channel. It's a story about family, hidden truths, and the quiet wounds we carry without even realizing it. I promise you by the end of this video, you will look at your own family, your own memories, in a completely different way. So grab a cup of tea, get comfortable, and watch this one till the very end, because the twist in the middle is going to change everything you think you understand about this story. Let's begin. My name is Renee. I have spent most of my adult life being the responsible one, the reliable one, the daughter who shows up early and leaves late, who remembers birthdays and drives 2 hours on Sundays just to sit at my mother's table and listen to her talk about people who are not me. I built a quiet, steady life. A husband named Marcus who works in logistics and doesn't understand family drama because his own family barely speaks. Two kids, Eva who was about to graduate high school and Theo who was 11 and obsessed with drawing comic book villains with tragic backstories. I was, by every visible measure, fine. But there is a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from being fine for too long. It sits behind your eyes. It waits. That Saturday I had driven to my mother's house to grab decorations for Ava's party, the kind of errand that should have taken 20 minutes. My mother Denise was out at her hair appointment, which she scheduled every second Saturday like a religious obligation. She told me the extra boxes with the good linens were in the attic, third shelf, and to help myself. I climbed the narrow attic stairs in the summer heat, sweat gathering at my collarbone, and started pulling down boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting: Christmas, Easter, miscellaneous, and then one that just said events, in faded marker, taped shut with yellowing tape that cracked when I opened it. Inside were stacks of paper, guest lists, seating charts, RSVP cards, thank you note drafts, going back to when I was maybe 12 years old. My mother has always been the family's self-appointed event planner, the woman who organizes the reunions, the anniversary dinners, the baby showers. Being invited to plan meant being trusted with the family's image. She took that seriously, almost sacredly. I wasn't looking for anything except tablecloths. But my hand landed on a guest list from my Aunt Carol's 50th birthday party, an event I remembered attending, an event where there's a photo of me in a green dress laughing next to my cousin Priya. And there, on the handwritten list, my name had originally been written in the same blue pen as everyone else's, then struck through with a single decisive line, and rewritten 2 lines down, squeezed between "and guest" for someone else, in a different pen entirely. At first I laughed. Genuinely laughed, alone in that hot attic, because it seemed so small. People cross out names all the time, lists get revised. Maybe I'd RSVP'd late, maybe there'd been a seating issue, but then I kept digging, and the pattern kept repeating. Every list I found, spanning 15, 16 years, had my name treated differently than everyone else's. Not omitted entirely. That would have been almost easier to understand, easier to write off as forgetfulness. Instead, my name was always initially included in the first pass, in the first ink, alongside my siblings and cousins, and then almost every single time, crossed out and rewritten, moved, squeezed in later, added as an afterthought in a different color, like she'd stepped away from the list and come back to it with second thoughts. My brother Danny's name never moved, my cousin Priya's name never moved, my name moved every time. I sat in that attic for over an hour, going through box after box, and by the time I heard my mother's car pull into the driveway below, I had 11 different lists spread across the dusty floor around me like evidence at a crime scene, because that's exactly what it had started to feel like. I didn't say anything about it that day. I gathered the tablecloths, thanked her, and drove home with my hands tied on the steering wheel and my mind somewhere else entirely. That night, after Marcus had gone to bed and the kids' bedroom lights had gone dark, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open to a blank document, trying to write out a timeline. Not because I wanted to build a case against my mother, I told myself that. I told myself I just wanted to understand. But understanding, once you start pulling that thread, doesn't stop where you want it to. I started remembering things I had spent years training myself not to remember. The Christmas when I was 16 and found out, 3 days after the fact, that the extended family had gathered at my aunt's house for a smaller pre-Christmas dinner, and nobody had told me. My mother's explanation at the time was that it had been a spontaneous, small thing, not worth mentioning. I had believed her. I wanted to believe her, because the alternative was unbearable. The wedding shower for my cousin Priya, where I found out afterward through a photo online that I'd been in the original planning group chat and then quietly removed, with my mother telling me later that there'd been some confusion about numbers. The time I overheard through a cracked door at a family gathering, my mother telling my Aunt Carol, "Renee gets so sensitive about these things, it's easier to just handle it without her sometimes." I had heard that sentence with my own ears when I was 23 years old, and I had swallowed it. I had absorbed it into my understanding of myself. I am sensitive. I am difficult. I am someone who needs to be handled around, managed, planned for like a complication rather than invited like a person. For 18 years I had carried that sentence as a fact about my own character. Sitting at my kitchen table with the guest list photographed on my phone, I started to wonder if it wasn't a fact about me at all. Maybe it was a story someone else had written, and I had simply agreed to perform the role I'd been cast in. The next few weeks, I told myself I was letting it go. I was busy anyway. Ava's graduation was approaching, and on top of the ceremony itself, we were planning a bigger celebration 2 weeks later, a proper party, because Ava had gotten into the nursing program she'd worked herself sick for, and she deserved a real celebration, not just cake in the backyard. Planning it should have been joyful, and parts of it were. Ava sitting cross-legged on our living room floor with a notebook, listing which of her friends to invite, which songs she wanted, whether we could afford a taco truck. Theo drawing a poster that said "Congrats Ava" in bubble letters filled with tiny doodled skulls, because that's just who Theo is. But underneath the joy, something had shifted in me. Every time I made my own guest list for my daughter's party, I found myself staring at it differently, studying my own handwriting, checking almost obsessively that I hadn't unconsciously done to someone else what had been done to me. And every time I thought about who to invite from my mother's side of the family, my stomach tightened, because now I couldn't stop noticing. My mother called me on a Tuesday evening, the way she always did, ostensibly to talk about Ava's party, but really I was starting to understand, to make sure she remained at the center of it. "I was thinking," she said, "we should do it at my house, more space. And I have the good folding tables. We already booked the community hall, Mom. I told you last week." A pause. "I just think it would mean more if it was here. Family history and all that." Family history. The phrase landed strangely in my chest. "What do you mean, family history? You know, this is where we did your quinceañera." "Well, we didn't do a quinceañera, but you know what I mean. Family things happen here." I gripped the phone a little tighter. "Mom, did we do anything for my 16th birthday?" The question came out before I'd fully decided to ask it. There was a silence on the line, the kind of silence that has weight. "Of course we did," she said finally. "We had that whole dinner. Don't you remember? Everyone came." I did not remember everyone coming. I remembered a Tuesday that felt like every other Tuesday. My father working late, my mother making a box cake because she'd forgotten to plan ahead. No cousins, no Aunt Carol, nothing that resembled the dinners she threw for my brother's birthdays, which always had folding tables set up in the backyard and store-bought decorations and half the extended family in attendance. "I don't remember it that way," I said carefully. "Well, you were a teenager. Teenagers remember things dramatically." She laughed, a light, dismissive laugh that I had heard my entire life and had never once questioned until that moment. "You always did have a flair for feeling left out, even when you weren't." There it was again. The sentence, dressed in slightly different clothes, but the same sentence. I didn't argue with her. I have never been someone who argues with my mother, because arguing with my mother had always felt like arguing with gravity, pointless, and likely to end with me on the ground. I said something non-committal, told her I had to go check on dinner, and hung up. Then I opened my laptop again and pulled up the photos I'd taken of the old guest lists. I found the one for what should have been my 16th birthday. It wasn't a birthday list at all. It was Danny's list for his 18th birthday party, which had happened 6 months after mine. Danny's guest list had 31 names on it, written in one clean pass, no crossings out, no revisions, family, friends, neighbors, all included from the very beginning. There was no separate document for my 16th birthday at all. Not because it had been lost, because I was starting to understand it had probably never really existed the way my mother remembered or claimed to remember it existing. That was the moment the first real crack opened in the story I had always been told about myself and my family. I decided, against every instinct that told me to let sleeping dogs lie, that I needed to talk to my Aunt Carol. Carol is my mother's younger sister, 7 years apart, and while they've always been close in that complicated sibling way, Carol has never had my mother's need to control every narrative. Carol is blunt. Carol says things at dinner tables that make my mother's jaw tighten. I invited her to lunch, alone, at a small cafe near her house, and I brought printed copies of 3 of the guest lists, the ones with my name crossed out and rewritten. I laid them on the table between the bread basket and our water glasses like I was presenting evidence in a trial I hadn't told her we were having. Carol looked at them for a long moment. Then she looked up at me, and something in her face had gone very still. "Where did you find these?" "In her attic. I was looking for tablecloths." Carol exhaled slowly and sat back in her chair. "Renee, I need you to understand something about your mother, and I need you to hear it the way I mean it, not the way it might sound." My heart was pounding. "Okay, your mother has spent her whole life terrified of being unseen." Carol said it slowly, like she was choosing each word from a box of very breakable things. "Our mother, your grandma Ruth, she had a favorite, and it wasn't Denise. It was our older sister Angela, the one who died before you were born. Denise spent her whole childhood being the afterthought in that house. Second choice, the one who got remembered last, invited last, seated at the end of the table. Pig, I had never heard this. My mother almost never spoke about her own childhood, and when she did, it was in vague, sanitized terms. A happy home, a loving mother, simple times. When Angela died, Carol continued, your mother was 22. And I think in some way she's never said out loud, she felt like she finally had a chance to become the center of something, the person everyone looked to, the one who threw the parties, who remembered the birthdays, who made sure everyone felt included. That doesn't explain why I was the one being excluded, I said quietly. If she was so afraid of being invisible herself, why would she do that to me? Carol looked at me with something that felt uncomfortably close to pity. Because you look like him, Renee. Like who? Your father, your real father. The bottom of my stomach dropped out. Dog, I need to explain something here because this is where the story stopped being just about crossed out names on a guest list and became about something much deeper, something I had never questioned because I had never had any reason to question it. The man I called Dad growing up, Robert, was not my biological father. I did not know this. Nobody had ever told me this. I had grown up believing, without a single doubt, that Robert was my father, the way you believe the sky is blue, without evidence, because it simply is what it is. Carol's face went pale the moment the words left her mouth. Oh God, you don't know. Know what, Carol? My voice came out strange, thin, like it belonged to someone else. She reached across the table and took my hand, and I let her, even though every part of me wanted to pull away and run out of that cafe and keep running until the world made sense again. Your mother was involved with someone before she married Robert, briefly. It ended badly. He left when she told him she was pregnant. She married Robert 4 months later, and he raised you as his own, and as far as I know, he never once treated you differently because of it. He loved you. That part was real. I sat there in stunned silence, staring at guest lists on a cafe table, trying to understand how a piece of paper about a 50th birthday party had somehow led me here. You have his eyes, Carol said softly. The man before Robert. I only met him twice, but I remember thinking, when you were born, how much you looked like him. And I think, over the years, every time your mother looked at you, really looked at you, some small part of her saw him, saw the version of her life where she wasn't good enough to keep someone. And I think without ever admitting it to herself, she pulled away from you in these small ways, crossed you out, wrote you back in, because some part of her couldn't decide if she wanted to fully claim you or fully protect herself from the reminder you carried. I didn't cry in that cafe. I wanted to, but something in me had gone very quiet and very still, the way water goes still right before it starts to boil. I drove home that day in a fog. I don't remember most of the drive. I remember pulling into my driveway and sitting in the car for almost 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside, because I didn't know how to walk through my front door and be a normal mother to my own children when the foundation of my entire identity had just been quietly rearranged. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Marcus everything. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I love most about him, his ability to simply hold space for something without immediately trying to fix it. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. How do you feel? He asked finally. I don't know, I said honestly. Angry, sad, strangely relieved. Relieved? For 18 years, I thought there was something wrong with me, some flaw that made me the one who got left off lists, left out of dinners, treated like an afterthought. I thought it was because I was too sensitive, too difficult, too much. And now I find out it was never about me at all. It was about a version of her own pain that had nothing to do with who I actually am. Marcus reached over and took my hand. So what are you going to do? I didn't have an answer that night, but I knew, somewhere underneath the shock, that I couldn't go back to pretending. Something had cracked open, and there was no closing it again. I went to see my mother 3 days later. I told her I wanted to talk, and something in my voice must have carried a weight she wasn't used to hearing from me, because she didn't try to reschedule or redirect the conversation the way she usually did when things got uncomfortable. We sat in her kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd eaten hundreds of dinners as a child, where I'd done homework at that same table, where I'd once believed without question that I fully belonged. I laid the guest lists on the table, the same way I had with Carol. And then I told her what Carol had told me. I watched something happen to my mother's face that I had never seen in 41 years of knowing her. The careful, composed expression she wore like armor cracked, just slightly, at the edges. For a moment she looked like someone much younger than 66. She looked like someone's overlooked daughter. Carol shouldn't have told you that, she said quietly. Is it true? A long silence. Then, almost inaudibly, yes. Were you ever going to tell me? I didn't see the point, she said, and her voice cracked slightly on the word point. Robert loved you. He was your father in every way that mattered. I didn't see why you needed to carry that other story too. But I was carrying it, Mom. My own voice was shaking now, but I kept going. I just didn't know what it was. I thought I was carrying some kind of personal failing. I thought there was something about me that made me easy to overlook. Do you understand what that does to a person? To grow up believing you're the difficult one, the sensitive one, the one who has to be managed, when really you were just a mirror for something you never even knew existed. My mother put her hands over her face. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller than I had ever heard it. I didn't know I was doing it, she said. I promise you, Renee, I never sat down and decided to cross your name off a list because of who your father was. It wasn't conscious. It was just, some days, when I looked at you, especially when you were younger, I'd see something in your face, in the shape of your eyes, and it would take me right back to being 22 and terrified and alone, and I think, in those moments, I pulled away without even realizing I was doing it, and then I'd feel guilty, and I'd add you back in. And I never once thought about what that back and forth might have looked like from where you were standing. It looked like I didn't fully belong anywhere, I said, not fully in, not fully out, just conditional. My mother started crying then, the kind of crying that comes from somewhere old and unaddressed. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to comfort her. I sat with my own pain instead and let it exist in the room alongside hers, without one erasing the other. I was so afraid of becoming invisible the way I felt with my own mother, she said through tears. And I think, somewhere in me, some ugly part of me thought that if I made you feel unstable in your place in this family, I would never have to feel that way myself. If you were the one who might not belong, I couldn't be. It was, I realized, listening to her, a kind of psychological inheritance. My grandmother's insecurity had shaped my mother's need to always be the center. My mother's insecurity in turn had reached forward through decades and shaped my own quiet belief that I was somehow less worthy of unconditional inclusion than everyone else around me. Nobody had ever hit me. Nobody had ever screamed at me or thrown me out of a house. It had all happened in ink, in small revisions, in dinners I found out about 3 days late, in sentences overheard through cracked doors. The violence of it was so quiet, so deniable, that I had spent 18 years thinking the problem was me. I want to tell you that this conversation fixed everything, that my mother and I hugged and cried and rebuilt something whole and healed in that kitchen. That is not what happened, because that is not how real families work. What happened instead was smaller, and in some ways more important. I told my mother that I loved her and that I believed she hadn't set out to hurt me on purpose. And I also told her that understanding why something happened doesn't obligate me to keep letting it happen. I'm planning Ava's party, I said. And I'm making the guest list myself, once in one pass, with no revisions. Everyone on it is invited because I want them there, fully, without conditions. That includes you. But I need you to understand that going forward, if I ever feel like I'm being treated as optional in this family again, I won't wait 15 years to find the paper trail. I'll say something immediately. My mother nodded, still crying, and said the only thing I think she could say in that moment, okay. It wasn't a full resolution, there was no lightning bolt of transformation, but it was honest, and after a lifetime of small, quiet erasures, honest felt like enough of a beginning. Ava's graduation party happened 2 weeks later, in the community hall we'd booked, with the taco truck parked outside and string lights hung across the ceiling by Marcus and Theo, who took the job far too seriously and used a level to make sure they were perfectly even. I wrote the guest list myself, once, that final evening, sitting at my kitchen table with a single pen. I thought about every name before I wrote it. Not because I doubted anyone's place, but because for the first time in my life I understood the weight that a name on a list can carry, and I wanted every single person Ava loved to know, without ambiguity, without revision, that they were wanted there completely. My mother came. She stood a little apart from the crowd for most of the party, watching Ava laugh with her friends, watching Theo proudly explain his poster to anyone who would listen. At one point she found me near the drink table and stood beside me quietly. "You did a beautiful job with this," she said. "Thank you. I mean it. It feels like everyone belongs here. Nobody's on the outside looking in." I looked at her for a long moment. That was the point. She nodded and I saw something pass across her face that might have been regret, or grief, or maybe just recognition. We didn't say anything else about it that night. Some things don't need to be spoken again once they've truly been heard. Later, after most of the guests had gone and we were folding tables into the back of Marcus's truck, Eva came and found me, her cap still slightly crooked on her head, her eyes bright with the kind of joy that only happens once, at exactly this age, at exactly this threshold in a life. "Good, Mom, this was perfect," she said, wrapping her arms around me. "Everyone I love was here." I held her, and over her shoulder I watched my mother helping Theo stack folding chairs, laughing at something he said, fully present, fully there. I thought about the attic, about the boxes of paper that held years of quiet math about who mattered and who didn't, who was worth the first ink and who had to be squeezed in later, as an afterthought, in whatever pen happened to be nearby. I thought about how easy it would have been to never open that box, to grab the tablecloths and walk back downstairs and let those old lists sit in the dark for another 30 years, undisturbed, unquestioned, quietly shaping the next generation the way they had shaped mine. I had spent so many years believing that the discomfort I felt in my own family was a flaw in my character. It took one accidental afternoon in an attic to show me that the flaw had never been in me at all. It had been in a system of quiet exclusion so normalized that everyone involved, including the people doing the excluding, had lost sight of how much damage they were causing. I don't know if my mother will ever fully change. People carry their childhood wounds for a lifetime, and sometimes those wounds leak into the people they love most, no matter how hard they try to contain them. But I know that I broke something that night, something that had been quietly repeating itself for at least 3 generations. I know that my own children will never have to wonder, decades from now, whether their names were written in the first ink or the last. Some inheritances are made of money, or land, or old photographs. And some inheritances are made of silence, of small crossings out, of who gets remembered and who gets rewritten. I chose that summer, in that community hall with string lights above my daughter's head, to stop passing that particular inheritance forward. I still have the old guest lists. I kept them actually in a folder in my own closet, not as evidence against my mother, but as a reminder to myself. Every time I plan something now, a birthday, a holiday, a small Tuesday dinner that means nothing to anyone except the people sitting at the table, I write every name in one pass, in one ink, and I mean every single one of them completely. Because I learned, in the end, that being included shouldn't require earning it twice, and the people who are truly yours will never make you check, again and again, in old boxes in dusty attics, whether you ever really belonged. And that's the end of today's story here on Silent Eyes Tales. If this touched something in you, if it made you think about your own family, your own place at the table, please take a moment to hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever felt like Renee, crossed out and rewritten in your own family story? I read every single comment, and I would love to hear yours. If you know someone who needs to hear this story today, please share it with them. It might mean more to them than you realize. And if you're new here, subscribe to Silent Eyes Tales, because we bring you a new, deeply emotional, real-life story just like this one every single week. Thank you for watching till the end, and I'll see you in the next story.